What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast. I am, of course, your host, who does the most, Ethan Smith. Hope you guys are all having a phenomenal Monday. I believe it is November 7th. Yes, November 7th. We are 4 days away from free agency opening. But on today's episode, the World Series affirmed something that we knew, that the Astros were the best team in the American League as they won the World Series against the Philadelphia Phillies on Saturday. But we're going to revisit the 1979, 1971, and 1960 World Series here briefly today on the Locked On Pirates podcast, and also lightly touch on how the Pirates can get back to the promised land. Also, Nick Gonzales, Quinn Priester, and Henry Davis were all on the all-star team for the Arizona Fall League. Nick Gonzales got in the game and shined. So we're going to talk a little bit about Henry Davis and Nick Gonzales today, about how they performed in the Arizona Fall League and how they could be integral parts of this team moving forward. And also, Bet Online, the sponsor of today's show, has released some early, albeit early, very early, betting lines for the World Series going into 2023, with plenty of stuff still ready to happen in free agency. But we're going to lightly touch on that and see what I like and what I don't like in terms of those betting odds. With that said, guys, again, today's episode is brought to you by the wonderful people over at Bet Online. More on them later. Also, thank you for making me your first listen of the day here on the Locked On Pirates podcast, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, being talked about all the time. And that's what we do here on the Locked On Pirates podcast. Again, I am, of course, your host who does the most, Ethan Smith. You can follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates. And with that said, guys, let's get into today's episode.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to that Pirates podcast, everybody. I am feeling a little bit better today. Not completely perfect, but we're definitely in podcast form. I am, of course, your host who does the most, Ethan Smith. You guys have also probably been wondering where Gary is. There's just been some scheduling conflicts with him and I. He will be back soon. He will be back this off season. I'm hoping to have him next week. I know you guys love when Gary is on the show. You absolutely love his energy. So he will be back. I do promise you that. On today's episode, as mentioned, we're going to be revisiting some World Series titles from the Pittsburgh Pirates. I did omit the ones from the early 1900s because, just to be quite plain, I don't really know too much about those. I don't think anybody really does. All I know is that Hannes Wagner was an absolute beast, and that was basically why the Pirates were able to win those. So we're going to revisit the 1979, 1971, and 1960 World Series pretty lightly here, and then also talk about how the Pirates can get back to the promised land. I wouldn't say very soon. I mean, I would say at minimum 2 or 3 more years before we can really start thinking about a possible World Series in Pittsburgh. But I think that there is a light at the end of the tunnel to at least start having the conversation with the prospects that the Pirates are going to have at their disposal over the next couple of years. So let's start with the most recent one, 1979. You take a look here. The Pirates won all of these series in 7 games because, of course, they did, because they're the Pittsburgh Pirates and they have to stress out their fan base as much as possible. This kind of series, I've rewatched Game 7 on October 17th, 1979. I've rewatched Game 7 of this series so many times. And you look at what the Pirates had at their disposal here in Don Robinson, Kent Tekulve, John Candelaria, Bert Blyleven. They had a awesome pitching staff at their disposal. But really the difference in this series, as you can see, was the hitting staff. And there you go. I mean, this was the lineup that was primarily playing for this team. This was the guys that primarily played in the 1979 World Series. Of course, Willie Stargell was the World Series MVP with a 400 batting average, 3 home runs, 7 RBIs, only 6 strikeouts to his credit, and 30 at bats. But not a too bad of a series either for a guy like Phil Garner, who wasn't really hitting home runs or anything. It was really only Willie Stargell who hit the home runs, as you can see. But Phil Garner, 5 RBIs with a 500 batting average in 7 games. Bill Madlock with a 375 average. Omar Moreno with a 333 average. Dave Parker, 4 RBIs. Hey, don't mind me. It's just me and the boys bopping. 345, 394, 448, 842. And I hear people talk about this World Series all the time, especially because the 70s was just such a great time to be a Pittsburgh sports fan. I mean, you get the Steelers with 4 Super Bowls, you get the Pirates with 2 World Series. The Penguins, of course, were not really that prominent yet. But man, I could have not believe this kind like when I look at this lineup again and I look at what this team had, and then you look at the regular season stats all the way to the right, and it was even better. But just what a lineup, man. Manny Sanguian, Ed Ott, John Milner, Don Robinson, Steve Nicosia, Lee Lacy, Grant Jackson, Kent DeColvey, Willie Stargell, Bill Robinson, Dave Parker, Omar Moreno, Bill Madlock, Phil Garner, and Tim Foley. And like I said, you go back over here, and that included John Candelaria, Kenta Colby, Burt Blyleven. Just a wonderful team. Don Robinson. It was just an awesome team to go back and watch, especially at my young age, because this was the last time that the Pirates did win a World Series, and they're going to get back there. But then we go to 71, which was a team that looked a little bit of the same, but it was the same team that they beat in the same amount of games. Ironically, on the same day, October 17th, game 7. Also, ironically, if you look in Baltimore, it was a repeat of something that happened 8 years before. The Orioles started this series out up 2-0, and I've rewatched part of this series too. When the Pirates got on that stretch from game 3 to game 5, they looked unbeatable. Steve Blass, of course, picked up the win in game 3. Um, Bruce Kyson picked up the win in game 4, and Nelson Bryles picked up the win in game 5. Steve Blass would, of course, pick up the huge win in game 7 in 1971 on October 17th. And then you look at this lineup. Oh, boy. Yeah, Bob Moose, Bob Miller, Richie Hebner, Dave Geesty, Vic DeValio, Gene Kleins, Jose Pagan, Al Oliver, Willie Stargell, Manny Sanguian, Bob Robertson, Jackie Hernandez, Roberto Clemente, and Dave Cash. Roberto Clemente was just unreal in this series. I mean, 2 home runs, 4 RBIs, only 2 strikeouts, 414, 452, 759 with over a 1,200 OPS. Roberto Clemente was just a ridiculous baseball player. I don't think there's anything you could say about that. And again, if you guys get the chance to go rewatch these World Series, just do it. They're you could find them on YouTube. You could find them pretty much anywhere, especially the game sevens. I mean, it was just awesome stuff to see what the Pirates could do with these teams. And I mean, again, you look at the guys that they had, and also not listed on this lineup card here with all of these players is Bill Mazeroski, who was on the tail end of his career, albeit, but still got another World Series ring to his credit. But the Pirates just had so many prominent names on these teams. I mean, like I mentioned, Steve Blass, Kent DeColvey, Roberto Clemente, Willie Stargell, um, Bill Madlock. I mean, they just had so many prominent names that obviously I was not alive to see. I was not alive to appreciate, but through video, through memories from my family, through all that stuff that I've heard about what they experienced when the Pirates did this, I just heard that the city just was electric when this happened. And 71 was really kind of the start of the decade of prominence for the sports in Pittsburgh because they won in 71. The Steelers won in 74 and 75, and then 78 and then 79. They both win. Pittsburgh sports was on a very big high horse in the 70s. The 80s came and it just fell apart. And then the 90s came and Mario Lemieux came around. And then the Steelers got back to the Super Bowl and the Pirates had Barry Bonds, Bobby Bonilla, Andy Van Slyke, Tim Wakefield. They had a team, but we all remember what happened in 1992 in Atlanta in Game 7. Don't think I need to remind you. Then we go to 1960, and he had Vern Law, Bob Friend. What a series this had to be. And I've seen Game 7 of this as well on YouTube and stuff. Harvey Maddox, just Roy Face. Look at the names on this if you're on YouTube. Whitey Ford for the Yankees. Oh my god, Bobby Shantz. Just Rob Turley. Just what a crazy team the Yankees have. But then you look at the Pirates, man. Of course, you have Bill Mazeroski, Roberto Clemente, Dick Groat, Don Hoke, Bill Verdon, Smokey Burgess, Dick Stewart, Roy Face, Rocky Nelson, Gene Baker, Tom Cheney, Joe Christopher, Bob Friend, Friend Green, Clem Labine, Vern Law, Dick Schofield, Hal Smith, Red Witt. This was a team that was loaded for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I mean, to beat the Yankees the way they did with the Bill Mazeroski Game 7 walk-off home run, which is regarded as one of the best baseball moments of all time, not only in Pittsburgh, but also in just baseball history. This was just something that Pirates fans can always look back on and say, okay, this is a moment in Pirates history that will forever be immortalized. I mean, Bill Mazeroski doing that in Forbes Field, literally getting hounded as he's trying to run around the bases was just something, even for me, that obviously, again, I wasn't there, but watching it was just something to marvel at. It really was. It was just something that you're like, this actually happened. This is something that if it happened nowadays, especially against the Yankees, Pirates Twitter might explode. And you look at the big players in this series. Obviously, Clemente was a big player. Bill Mazeroski, of course, I believe won MVP. Rocky Nelson was a major player in this series. Vern Law, Dick Schofield, and Hal Smith each had a couple at bats in there where they actually hit the ball pretty well. Again, Smokey Burgess. Um, I mean, just crazy, man. But I also want you guys to share your thoughts about these World Series titles. And for the Pirates to get back there, I mean, they have the prospect pool right now that is proving that this team can get back to a state of winning pretty soon. I don't know if it's going to be 2023, but I am very confident in 2024 that this team will start winning again. Not saying winning a World Series, though. To win a World Series, I do have to confidently say I think the Pirates have to start spending money at some point. They have to go get a marquee free agent. They have to go get something like that to get back to that point. And maybe we'll touch on that a little bit tomorrow. But today's episode is brought to you by the wonderful people over at betonline.ag. Of course, betonline is the place to do all of your betting this season. The baseball season is over, which means you can't bet on baseball anymore, but there is no shortage of stuff to bet on right now because betonline.net is your number one source for betting football and the start of the new basketball season. Find all of the latest sports player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf, as well as the NHL. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action happening today on BetOnline because BetOnline is where the game starts. Again, my name is Ethan Smith of the Locked On Pirates podcast. Also, make sure you go check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, where you can find all of the latest news on anything happening in the world of sports in under 20 minutes. It's a phenomenal place to go get lost because the acronym is LOST, LOST. So, very fun stuff there. But to talk a little bit about the Arizona Fall League for a minute. Of course, the Pirates had a ton of players over there, but Henry Davis, Quinn Priester, and Nick Gonzales were all named to the Arizona Fall League All-Star team. Nick Gonzales was the only person to actually see playing time in the game, which was not a big deal to me. But the Arizona Fall League is always kind of fun to look at and always fun to take a little gander at, just because you want to see how your young prospects do against another team's young prospects. And we're going to pull up Nick Gonzales here. These are his stats from 2022 all the way through. Of course, in Altoona, where he spent most of his time, 7 home runs, 33 RBIs, 263, 383, 429, 812 slash line. Of course, he killed it in rookie ball for like 2 games. And then he was in Bradenton for like 1 game. But you look at his Arizona Fall League stats there on the bottom: 17 games, 1 home run, 3 RBI. Wait, am I reading that wrong? I might be reading that wrong. 3 home runs, 12 RBI. So he actually had 7 home runs and 7 home runs, 33 RBIs in 2022. Um, the batting average is kind of lackadaisical to me. 238. That's not what you want to see from Nick Gonzales, who was regarded as the best pure hitter in the draft in 2020. But the slugging and the OPS and the on base percentage is very, very promising. 319, 460. The OPS at a 780 could be a little bit higher, but not much you can really do about that in that front. Nick Gonzales, of course, to mention, he did actually have a cool game in the Arizona Fall League Classic. He had a double that scored a run in the 5th inning for his team, the Surprise, the team that he was on the All Star game, and that led to a 5 run or 6 run 5th inning for the team he was on. Again, Henry Davis did not play, but I still found it interesting to look at his stats from the Arizona Fall League, where he played 17 games. Pretty good stuff from Henry Davis: 260, 435, 440, 875 slash line in 17 games. You look at Greensboro and Altoona, he dominated in Greensboro. I mean, he was 342, 450, 585 with an over 1,000 OPS. He did the same thing in Bradenton: 364, 467, 727, 1,194 OPS. Altoona, which is where he spent the majority of his year, actually outside of Greensboro, was where he saw the most struggles. And of course, he was dealing with injury at that point as well. But a 207, 324, 379, 703 slash line is kind of concerning. But again, let's remind ourselves that Henry Davis was also dealing with injury in 2022. 2023 is going to be very interesting for Henry Davis. It might be a year where Henry Davis does get the call up. But also, let's keep in mind he wasn't even the best catcher in the system this year when it came to Endy Rodriguez, who I don't think competed in the Arizona Fall League. I didn't pay attention to it that much. I did pay attention to who was there. I just didn't pay it. I didn't see if he was there or not. If he was, I apologize for missing that. Um, Henry Davis, I do think between him and Endy Rodriguez, just to touch on this for a minute, I think Henry Davis is going to be the one that's more likely going to stick at the catcher position. I would like to see Endy Rodriguez maybe move to first base with the hole that they currently have there. Hopefully, a hole that they fix in free agency. I don't know if that's something that they will do, but it's something that I would like to see them do in free agency. Or I would, like I said, I wouldn't mind Endy Rodriguez at first base. If the bat plays, which it definitely did this year for him, I think first base wouldn't be a bad spot for him. He is a good defensive player. He can also move to the outfield. He's a catcher by trade, but he can move to all different kinds of parts of the field. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I really wouldn't. And when you look at what the Pirates have there, just 2 years ago, this catcher position for them in the system was just awful. And it still has been, obviously, because Endy Rodriguez and Henry Davis are not near ready yet. But when you look at where they are in the future, it definitely holds a lot more credibility than it did even 2 years ago when the catcher position was an absolute mess in the system and Jacob Stallings had to hold the position down or the position was going to literally fall apart. Which, as I say, with that trade will always still infuriate me. Although Zach Thompson hasn't been absolutely terrible, I still think Jacob Stallings holds a little more firm from. I think he holds a little more credibility than Zach Thompson and holds a little bit more of a importance than Zach Thompson would have been. But Connor Scott, could be a guy that makes up for it in that trade if all else fails. So if you're on audio, you're going to get an ad here in just a moment. But if you're on YouTube, we're going to stay right here. All righty, everybody, and welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast. I am, of course, your host who does the most, Ethan Smith. Again, hope you guys are all having a phenomenal Monday, November 7th. And Bet Online, of course, the sponsor of today's episode. We're actually going to pull them up down here on the bottom while I talk about this to give them a nice little shout out, as Pat McAfee would say, shout out. Uh, we actually already have some opening World Series odds already. With the World Series gone and behind us, the 2022 season is gone and behind us. Let's take a look at the 2022 odds first. The Dodgers were 5-1 to win the World Series in 2022. These were the opening odds, and these were how they mainly stayed. The Astros were 13-2. Of course, they won the World Series. So if you hit on that, pretty good stuff there. Yankees were 10-1. The Atlanta Braves were 11-1. The Chicago White Sox, who didn't even make the playoffs, were 12-1. The Red Sox were 14-1 and didn't make the playoffs. The Brewers 16-1 didn't make the playoffs. The Rays were 14-1. Padres 16-1, Blue Jays 16-1, Mets 18-1, Giants didn't make the playoffs 18-1, Cardinals 25-1, Phillies, who made the World Series, were 28-1. So if you would have threw money on that, you were very, very, very close. The Cincinnati Reds, again, remind yourself these were the opening odds for 2022, were 33-1. The Angels and the Athletics were both 35-1. The Guardians, who made the playoffs, were 40-1. The Mariners were 40-1. Nationals 50-1. Cubs 66-1. Rockies, Tigers, and Twins 75-1. Marlins 8-1. The Pirates and the Royals were 100-1. The Rangers were 125-1. And the Diamondbacks and the Orioles were 150-1. Those were the opening odds. So at the same time, I'm talking to you about this right now. That's when those odds were from 2022. So in 2023, here's where stuff gets interesting. The Los Angeles Dodgers currently have the best odds to win the World Series in 2023 at 11-2. The Astros are in second at 7-1. The Braves are in third at 17-2 odds. The Yankees and the Blue Jays are 10-1. The Mets are 12-1. The Phillies and the Padres, who played each other in arguably the funnest NLCS I've watched in a while, are 14-1. The White Sox 16-1. Cardinals 18-1. The Mariners and 20-1. The Brewers 22-1. Red Sox, Rays 25. Giants 28, Angels 33, a slew of teams at 50-1. You have the Orioles, Guardians, Marlins, Twins, Rangers all at 50-1. The Tigers at 60-1, the Royals 75-1. You then have the Diamondbacks, Cubs, Reds, and Rockies at 100-1 odds, and then the Athletics, Pirates, and Nationals at 150-1 odds. Speaking on these odds for a minute, in terms of like not the Pirates, because I'm not worried about that. I do find it interesting that the White Sox are as high as they are after the year they had, but now that they are moving on from Tony La Russa, I do think there is a pretty strong chance they could win the AL Central next year. Also, the Brewers being as high as they are at 22-1 is very surprising to me. I would say the Rays definitely deserve to be ahead of them. And I think the Mariners should be ahead of the Cardinals. I think that this 2022 season for the Mariners was just a stepping stone for what Julio Rodriguez could be for that city, what that team could be for that city. Of course, they get Luis Castillo, who was a big deal for them down the stretch. I would honestly move their odds up. But again, I'm not an odds maker. I don't know how this stuff works. These are just the odds. But if you had to ask me right now who I would throw my money at this exact moment, probably be the Atlanta Braves at 17-2 odds. I like that. I mean, they already have most of their core solidified. Free agency is going to be a little bit weird for them because I think they have to re-sign Dansby Swanson. But I wouldn't mind throwing money at them. 7-1 on the Astros, that wouldn't be bad either because I think the Astros are just going to be a force in the AL again. The Yankees at 10-1, again, these are initial odds, is very interesting with the Aaron Judge free agency decision still not being made yet. So those are the odds to win the 2023 World Series as they stand right now from Bet Online. Again, make sure you go check them out. They are absolutely awesome. And with that said, guys, thank you so much for tuning in today and dealing with my still somewhat raspy voice. I am, of course, your host who does the most, Ethan Smith. Thank you for joining me here on Monday, November 7th of 2022 as the 2022 slowly trickles down. Thank you guys always for tuning into this Locked On Pirates podcast. Thank you so much again, as you always do, with the comments, the likes, the views, everything. Make sure you go check out Locked On Sports Today with Peter Bukowski. It's always a good time. Make sure you go get caught up on all of your sports news. And with that said, guys, I will see you on the flip side.